There we are. Okay, we're doing modulation. Definition of modulation, very quickly, is changing the key. Does not require a change of key signature, only change of key. All right, so now that we understand what a modulation is, let's say there's two kinds of modulation. And I will write this on our whiteboard. One kind of modulation is what we call to a closely, come on you, closely related key. And sometimes we go to foreign keys. We're not going to go to foreign keys in this chapter. We're only going to do just closely related keys. Does anyone know the definition of a closely related key? If not, does anyone want to guess at the definition of a closely related key? Does anyone care about closely related keys? Okay, a closely related key is, I'll put it here. And to show you how hip I am, I'm going to put initials. The closely related key, no one calls it a CRK, but I'm going to put it in there just to save time. Closely related key is a different tonic, but no more than one sharp or flat different. So let's figure out that means there are 5 closely related keys to any major or minor key. Let's see if we can figure that out. So let's pretend we're in the key of C. Let's just pretend we're in the key of C. Key of C has no sharps or flats. So what are the 5 keys that do not have C as their tonic, but have no more than one sharp or one flat difference? So they either have no sharps or flats, or one sharp or one flat. What might they be? Go ahead, shout them out.
A minor.
A minor. So A minor is one. Am I still in here? So let's take the capital F. A minor, I'll do a small letter for minor. A minor has no sharps or flats different, but a different tonic. Who wants to give me another?
G major.
G major, because G major has one sharp and it's a different tonic. So it's a closely related key. Give me another.
F major.
F major. It's got one flat, but at a different tonic, but no more than one flat. F major. There are 2 more. And I'll give you hints. They're relative minors of some of the majors you have up there.
E flat minor.
I think you mean E minor, to be the same as G major.
Oh, yeah.
Because, yeah, E flat minor has lots of flats. So I think you want E minor. But yes, that's right. And what would the other one be?
D minor.
D minor, exactly. So basically, if you're in a major key, the relative minor, the dominant, and the tonic, and their relative minors are all closely related keys. They're easy to modulate to. The other keys are harder to modulate to. There are lots of tricks to do that, but not for this chapter. We're just going to learn how to modulate these closely related keys. And if I was in minor, it's not that different. I'll quickly just do it for you, but you'll see it. Let's say I'm in A minor. Then it's the relative major. And then A is still, so what would you have it as, E and D minor, in D minor, and G and F, because you still have no sharps or flats. So the same 4 keys have one sharp or one flat, and then it's the relative majors to the relative minor. It's the same thing. If you look at your major, it's the dominant, it's the tonic, their relative minors, and the relative minor. Or if you're in minor, it's the relative major, its tonic and dominant, and their relative minors. It's always the same. There are 5 closely related keys. That's it. That's it. Very easy. So the distantly related keys would be something like this. In the key of C, the distantly related would be D flat. Let's give a bunch of them. F sharp. A. Let's see. Let's do a fun one. How about you said E flat minor. Those would all have lots of sharps and flats, or flats. So they would be foreign keys, not closely related. So this is an important concept, just because if you're going to modulate, if you're writing a piece and you want to go from C to E flat, you need some tricks that we're going to teach later. If you're going to go from C to F, you're going to have all the skills you need. So that's cool. Now there's 4 ways to modulate. The book only gives you 3. There are actually more than 4 in the real world, but there are 4 that will take you to closely related keys. All right. Does anyone know any of them? Take a guess. All right. I will just tell you because I am a lecturer, because I teach, and that's what I do. So the most common one in the classical era. The classical era is Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Ditters von Dittersdorf, Hummel. But basically, it's those Viennese composers that are so famous. The most popular one is what most books call a pivot chord, but our book, trying to be very modern, calls it a common chord modulation. So a pivot chord modulation or a common chord modulation. And what this means is that you start out at a key and you go it along according to our chord progression. You know, the 6 goes to the 4, goes to the 2, goes to the 5, goes to the 7, goes to the 1. You know, we have that chart. And we're going along like that. Suddenly we hit a chord that exists in both keys. And going into the chord, we're in one key, and coming out of the chord, we go to the other key that chord is in. What, you ask? What are you talking about? Well, I'm glad you asked that so I can show you. Let's take a look at some pretty straight ahead ones. Let's get this thing. Oh, I see why you can't, why it's doing that. We want to actually see finale. So are you seeing finale right now? Yes? Thumbs up if you're seeing the finale document. Okay. So here's my chords in C major, and I just labeled them. We know it's C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, C. We know that pretty well at this point. 3 minors, 3 majors, 1 diminished. Boom, there they are. If I go to F major, I have a very similar formula. F major, G minor, A minor, B flat major, C major, D minor, E diminished, and F. The same 3 chords are minor, 3 chords are major, 1's diminished. Now, if you look at these chords by letter name, so not looking at Roman numerals, we're doing macro analysis here, just letter name, we'll see that the C chord also exists in the key of F. The D chord also exists in the key of F. The E minor chord does not. It's an E diminished in the key of F. The F chord, though, is in the key of F. The G chord is not. In the key of F, G is minor. The A chord exists in the key of F, A minor chord. The B diminished does not. It's a B flat chord, it's major in there. So what we're seeing is there's 1, 2, 3, 4 chords. 1, 2, 3, 4 chords. I put these little brackets over them that exist in both C and in F. So we could use those as a common chord, being a chord in both keys, is common to both keys, or as a pivot chord, a chord that allows us to pivot from one key to the other. The terminology is different, the meaning is the same. And I'll give you an example. Look at this chord progression. C. Now, this is how you write it, but I'll get that in a minute. That's in the key of C, it's a 1 chord. To an A minor, that's a 6 chord. To an F chord, that's a 4 chord in C, but it's also a 1 chord in F. So I can go from the 1 chord in F, I'm now in F, to the C7, a 5 chord in F, back to the 1. And you know there's a modulation happening or a secondary dominant. You don't know which because there's an accidental. That tells you something's happening. So let's look at that again. C, A, and F are all in the key of C. It's a 1, 6, 4. But then I pivot. I change that, say that F chord is a 1 chord in F, 1, 5, 1 in F. And now I'm in the key of F, pretty solidly in F, because 1, 5, 1. And the way we write this is we say, what key am I in? We write the key, capital letter for major, small letter for minor, and a colon. That tells me I have a key of C. And they put my Roman numerals, a 1 chord, a 6 chord, a 4 chord. Now here I say, nope, I'm now in the key of F. So I put an F in capital letters because it's major, and a colon, and I say it's a 1 chord, a 5, 7, and a 1 in the key of F. And this chord here is in both. So this chord is written is the pivot chord or the common chord. It's common to both keys, or it helps us pivot from one key to the other. The terminology means the same thing, common chord or pivot chord. It's this chord that acts in both keys at once, and it takes us from one key to the other. So this is our notation. If we listen to it, we're going to hear, we start in C. I'm going to make sure you hear key of C. So C to a 4, to a 5, to a 1. So we're thinking key of C. But listen when we play it. Now it's a little sudden when you do it that way, but you hear that suddenly. I mean, it sounds like it's a 4 chord. I'm cruising around in C, and suddenly this chord says, "No, that's a 1." And in hindsight, our ear hears it as a 1. It takes us back. We've modulated. Now I could have made a much smoother modulation out of this, but this is the one I chose to make. So let's hear what happens. So now if I take this, you say, well, could I actually make a piece out of this? I turned it into a piece. I turned it into a little waltz. It's not a very good piece, but you'll hear it anyway. Oh yeah, I have a bit wrong rhythm in it too, but that's okay. Um, look at that. Not hard to do. I just took the chord exactly like I had done it. Oh, Leslie gives me applause. And just filled in melody notes. I put a few other moving notes in there because I couldn't resist. But you don't have to. I could have just done whatever I wanted to here. You notice all I did was I made a chord per measure. So that's my harmonic rhythm. And that made it very easy to make a nice little modulation. So this is how we do common chord modulation or pivot modulation. We just find a chord in common. Now, which chord is the pivot chord? It is the last possible pivot chord before you go chromatic. So, for example, if A minor is in both keys, right? A minor is the 3 chord in F, it's the 6 chord in C. But that's not the pivot chord because I have the F can act as a pivot chord, and here's our first chord that has to be an F. So the pivot chord is the last possible pivot before you change. It's not the early one, it's the last one, is the one we consider the pivot. So if I had made this a strange chord, I could have made this A the pivot chord. I could have done that. I could have made this a 2 chord in F and changed this chord. Maybe I'll do it for you later, but that's all it takes. So what I like you guys to do, we're going to do some practice. We're going to start simple. I'm going to keep the screen shared here so you can see which chords can function as pivots. It's anything with a bracket because it's in both keys. And normally this is how you start. I'm at a point right now where I pretty much know. I mean, the only difference is the B flat. So the 3 chords with B flats in them can't be used. Everything else is a perfectly good pivot. But I marked it here. So I want you to first write just in macro analysis, a progression that'll take you from C to F that's different from mine. So don't use F as your pivot chord. Use any other chord and just start here. So you start with a C chord. You go to another chord in the key of C that follows our progression. Find a pivot somewhere, switch the pivot, and have it take you to F according to the rules of progression. And just do it in macro and then share it on the chat. Let's just start there. And I'll wait for you to give me stuff on chat. Endlessly. I got one in, and if you guys give me permission to share when they're both in, I'll share them and show you strengths and weaknesses. If you don't give me permission, I'll just make some comments in general. Okay? we'll take a look at Daviel's and see if we can make sense out of it, okay? Yeah, so Leslie, you were using Roman numerals, and that's going to get you in some trouble because you can't do Roman numerals in one key. You have to what we call macro analysis, which is the letter names first, and then we have to do the Roman numeral analysis. Let me show you what I mean. So first of all, Daviel, which chord is your pivot chord? I see your progression there. Which chord is your pivot chord?
A minor.
The A minor. Okay. And so, and are you willing to let me share it?
Sure.
Okay. So here's what Daviel has as her progression. And I'll just, where is my, there it is. Okay. And she's being kind enough to let us share it. So I'm just going to put it up here in root position. Whoops. Okay. I keep thinking it's going to be in root position. Let's try it again. It's C chord to a G chord, 1, 5, to an F, to an A, to a D, and to a C. Okay, and by the way, let me take this flat out of here. We want to start in the key of C, and we don't want to be confusing. So let's see. Sorry. There we go. Major key, hold notes, original pitches. Okay. How'd you do that? Okay. Boom. All right. So we've got a C chord to a G chord to the F. Now, this is the first problem we run into. It's just that we have a 1 chord to a 5, and then you went to the 4. So we do that in rock, we do it in blues, but in classical music, 5 to 4 doesn't usually happen. And then you went to the 6, which is your pivot chord. And that's not a bad pivot chord, but let's just see how this all works. So let's just look at the Roman numerals and see if this is a good progression, and if it's not perfect, how we would fix it. So the way we write is we're going to start in C major. So we start with the first line is C major. We have a 1 chord to a 5 chord. Now this is my questionable chord. I'm not sure if 4 is a good choice there. Then we go to a 6, whoops, cap lock off. The 6, which is also in the key of F. So now I come over here to the key of F. Right here, we're now going to be in the key of F, and that's a 3 chord in the key of F. And then we went from there to a 6 chord to a 5. So this is not bad, but where does it run into problems? Well, first of all, there's no chromatics yet. So the real pivot chord is the D minor, because it can exist in both keys also. That's a 2 chord in C, and that's a 6 chord in F. And remember, the last chord before you get chromatic. And if we don't put a 7 on this chord could be in both keys. That could be a 5 chord in F and a 1 chord in C. So this would be the pivot chord if we don't put a 7th on it. And this is a pivot chord right now if we don't have either one. But let's start with this problem. So the first thing is this 4 chord shouldn't fall a 5. A 5 goes to 1, but it can go to a deceptive cadence. So the easiest thing to do is simply just eliminate that chord. Say, okay, we don't go to 4 chord. Whoops, we don't go to a 4 chord. Get rid of it, and I'm going to make that so it fills it in. So now we're saying we go to a 5 chord to a 6, a deceptive cadence. That's a perfectly good chord progression. Now let's see what happens. So I have to take the 4 out, but that's easy enough. Place it with some spaces. Okay. Now we said that this is actually our pivot chord, but only if we have a 7th on that 5 chord, because otherwise the 5 is the pivot chord. So let's put a 7th on there. So we have a B flat, first chromatic. And that would be this note. That would be this note. There we go. Come on, you can do it. Okay. Now it's a 5-7, and it can only be an F. So that's a 5-7 now. 5-7. So now it works, but this isn't really the pivot chord. The pivot chord is really the D, and that's because the 6 is going to go to a 2. And that would actually work beautifully as a, as a, something like that. It's a beautiful progression. So let's just review. We have to go in the order of our progressions. A 3 goes to 6, a 6 goes to a predominant goes to a dominant. The dominant wants to go to 1 unless it has a deceptive cadence where it usually goes to 6. And then the pivot chord is the last chord before the first chromatic alteration, the last chord that will work as a pivot before the chromatic alteration. So we have to make sure we have something in there that tells us we're in F. And then, of course, the next chord would be, after that would be your F chord. All right. Who's got questions on that? Nobody's got questions. Okay, so let's try it again. This is the kind of thing that you got to try with someone looking over your shoulder sometime before you're sure you get it right. So what I'd like you to do is, we've got the C major scale here. Write down quickly a G major scale and mark all the chords that are in common with the G major scale. And once you've done that, then, so you just put a little X over them if you want. Figure out the G major scale. So anything without an F sharp is going to be common to both keys. And then write in macro notation, just letter names, a chord progression that goes from C to G. Remember, we have to follow the chart, so we have to be aware of our Roman numerals. But let's start by finding that common chord going from C to G. Put it in the chat, and then if you've got good progressions, I'll ask you to write it out with Roman numerals and then write a piece based on it. Let's just see how we're doing. Let's first get our progression good. Send it to me in chat, okay?
So from C to G?
Yeah, from C to G.
Okay.
I like your progression, Davio. Like that progression too. Let me show you both of these guys. This is going to be kind of fun. All right. So let's just create some space at the end of finale. You can all still see finale, right? So I'll just create some stuff at the end. Ah. That's add 20 measures. That's good. Okay, so I'll do Leslie's first because she didn't get a chance to do last time. Is that okay, Leslie? You're okay with me showing yours?
Yeah.
Okay, so she has a C. I'm just going to put root position. Remember, just to get Roman numerals to an A, to a G. Then she went to the F sharp, diminished, back to the G. So let's take a look at it. The pivot chord, she says, is the G because here's our chromatic change. So that looks good to me. Let's just look at these Roman numerals now and see if they make sense. I put my little guy here, and I say in the key, we start in the key of C. It's a 1 chord to the 3 chord, gives lots of room. Whoops, the cap lock and finale does that to me. To a 6, a good progression. You can always go from a 6 to a 5. You're skipping a few, but it works. But that 5 is our pivot into G. So now I go into the second line and I say, oh, look at that. G chord. We're now in the key of G. That's a 1 chord. And then look at that, a 7 diminished. Oh, is that fun? Back to a 1. And there we go. Now, of course, if I'm in root position, all kinds of parallels. We're not going to actually be, we can be, but we're not going to just be block chords. But look how good that is. And that progression is going to move you really nice. You notice the chromatic is there. So the pivot is there. That's the last chord in common. Works very nicely. Now, Daviel had a surprisingly similar one. But of course, that makes sense because there are only a couple that really work. And so what she had was the 1 chord. Whoops. 1 chord to the 3 chord, to the 6 chord, but then she went straight to the 5-7 to take us to the 1. So the pivot chord here is the A chord because the chromatic is 5 to 1. So our Roman numerals are a little different, but it's going to work beautifully. Let me show them to you. Roman numerals. We start again in C major. We start with a 1 and we go to the 3. Whoa, the cap lock did it to me again. 3 to a 6. To a 5-7. I put that in inversion, but that was just because my hand was there. There's no reason it should be an inversion. And again, when we do what's this called? Macro analysis, we don't care. And so now we're seeing, then where's the pivot? The pivot is right here, the key of G. That chord of G is a 2 chord. 2 to a 5-7 to a 1. Very powerful progression. So this pivot allows us to go 2-5-7-1. A sort of that's a very strong cadence formula. This one goes 1-7-1, also a strong cadence formula with quite a different sound. So Daviel's will sound like this. There we go. Both are very smooth. Now, guys, I'm going to leave this thing showing for you. What I'd like you to do is do what I did. You know, I like doing waltzes when I'm first just messing around because a waltz, you go boom, chick, chick, boom. You could write your bass line on the downbeats and then throw in block chords, and then your melody could just use any notes here on the downbeats that are in the chords plus the passing tone, Joe, or neighbors. But you could be 4-4-2-4. You could write a march or anything. Just do 1 chord per measure, 1 chord per measure, and write me a little song based on this. And then if you could write it, and then if you want to share it, great. If you have a computer, great. If you want to photograph it and send it to me, and then I can play it. Or if you don't want to share it, that's fine. But this is just an idea that we could take this concept and turn it into actual music. Give it a shot. See if you can do it. All right. I'll give you a few minutes. I'm going to turn off my speaker. I'm going to unplug my earphones. So talk to me. Oops. If you have a question, I'm going to take the earphones off because it's hot in here. I'll also mute myself so I don't make you crazy. Okay, guys, give me a quick update. Is it hard? Is it easy? Are you making progress? Give me an update.
I think, I mean, I don't really have anything to send it to you, and I don't even know if I did it correctly. I just kind of did like the first chord. So like for mine, it was a C. So I did C in the bass clef, but the 2 octaves, the lower octaves. And then I did that same thing for like each chord. So like for the next one, it's E. So then E in the 2 lower octaves, and then the A in 2 lower octaves.
Yeah, so you've written the bass line now.
Yeah.
That's the
And I
right
thought that
idea.
made sense.
Yeah. Well, that's the right idea. That's a good start. Then you want to lay a melody over it. Then the chords just fill in. You just have to be careful if you have a seventh that it resolves right, things like that. But you don't have a seventh, and your leading tone's in the bass, so you don't have really any challenges with your analysis. That's the right way to do it. Work a few minutes longer. Let's see what happens. We may not get to a chance to finish. Davia, how's yours coming?
It's gonna take a while.
Okay, I'll tell you what, let's not finish it now. This is the kind of thing we'll want to be able to do in a week or so. But, you know, I was just improvising. If I've, you know, all you really have to do is you pick a note in the chord and you just move passing motion, or you could do it a paginatura. Let's see. You know, but we know what those rules are. You don't have to write a masterpiece. It's just you can't go very far wrong if you know how to handle enharmonic tones. You know what your chord notes are. Eventually, you can actually sort of fake it really fast. And you know, I often will do some improvising when I start composing a piece, and usually it's just ordinary. You know, you just kind of just ordinary. Then then you hear a sound that you kind of dig, and it becomes the basis of the piece. But if you just kind of know what the chord notes are and what the non-chord notes are, these things can come pretty fast if you don't overthink it. Just let yourself do what you know. All right, so that's your basic lesson in common tone modulation. I'm going to give you some foreshadowing of the next couple of days because there's 3 other kinds of modulations. One is called a chromatic modulation. Let's say, for example, I want to go to the key of G from the key of C. I might do this. I might have a melody that does this. Let's see, without any chords. Let's just do this. Let's see. And all I did is I just did a chromatic alteration. Key of C has no sharps. Key of G has 1 sharp. So you just add it. And if I improvise, and you can hear that will take me to G. It's called a chromatic modulation. We're going to spend more time on that on Wednesday and look at it in more depth. But just be aware it's a possibility. Another type of modulation, let me see if I've it's common chord, is what they call it a phrase modulation. I call it a direct modulation. That's when you have a phrase that goes like, wow, that was interesting. I was doing 2 hands and the computer's always set for 1. See, and then there's a pause, and then the next phrase is that was kind of stupid. D flat to A flat. So I'm in the key of C, and then I'm playing the key of D flat. We hear this in pop music all the time where you got a verse, you know, and then the last verse, I just gotta delete that now because I didn't realize I had the autoplay on. But anyway, a direct modulation or a phrase modulation is where you play a complete phrase in 1 key, and then all you do is you just change keys. So it's called a direct modulation. In pop music, we call it crank it up a half step to get the applause at the end. So direct modulation, you just jump to a different key. And that's common. And then the last guy, thank you for Leslie. You make me very happy. And the last kind is what is something that we see in the Baroque era, which is sequences. And the book doesn't even have anything on sequences. And I'll just show you what I mean. We talked about this before. Oh, that's right. I forgot I'm in 3/4, so that makes it easy. I can leave out some notes. Hold on a second. If I do my regular sequence and something like that, it doesn't change key. But if I make a real sequence, delete that so it makes sense. And then another real sequence. You can see I'm changing keys with the sequence. We're going over that Friday or Monday. And that's not in the book. But if we're going to understand the music up to about 1700s, the music of Bach and Vivaldi and Handel, the Messiah, those pieces, we got to get used to seeing this way of modulating through sequences. So 4 ways we're going to learn to modulate. We just did today common chord, also known as pivot chord, which you guys are getting a good handle on. Chromatic alteration, where you just change a note chromatically, which drives you to the next key. That we're going to look at Wednesday. We're going to look also at the direct modulation or phrase modulation. Very easy in concept. Hard to pull it off unless you just go up half a step, but people do this all the time. And then finally, using sequences to drive modulations. And between those those things, we can modulate to any closely related key and a couple of foreign keys, but we're not going to try to do that now. We'll just know we have some of those tools for later. So does anyone have any questions on any of that as we foreshadow the rest of the chapter? Leslie asks, does there need to be a cadence? You really do normally have to have a cadence to convince you of people you modulate. Otherwise, it feels like a secondary dominant. So yeah, there should be a cadence. In fact, usually there's a phrase after the cadence. Any other questions? Questions? Fantastic. Then you guys are sprung. Tomorrow, some ear training. Enjoy your day. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye. Have a good one.
You have a good one too. Bye-bye, everyone.